Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that so many of you came out. This is just great. It's so wonderful to see people are interested in this topic, whether you're here because cold water dipping is interesting to you, or whether you're here because the whole idea of figuring out how to sit with discomfort in a way that works a little bit better is interesting to you, or both. I'm just so glad you're here. So I'm going to talk about my experiences with cold water dipping. And if you may know about it, or you may think this is the craziest thing you've ever heard, it is a thing. And it's been around for a long time. It has been practiced in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe for a very long time. Many, many generations beyond that have been doing this. And it grew in popularity so much during the pandemic. It just like spread across the world during the pandemic. I think in part because it's a thing you can do with other people outside together. And that was, we were all looking for things like that. It also really boosts your mood so much. And we were all looking for that in the midst of COVID-19. And it also is, there's a lot of research that it supports your health in a lot of different ways too. But I didn't know any of that when I began. It was 2020, and on a May 1st, I just decided to jump in the river. And you know, the river's really cold on May 1st. But it just, I don't know what got into me. I just jumped in the river. And it was so exhilarating. I just knew immediately, like, oh, I'm going to be doing this again. This feels good. I don't know what this is. I don't know why it feels so good, but I want to do it again. And I spoke to my neighbor and she was like, okay, let's do it every day. So we began May 1st and we did it every day in May. And then we just kept going. Maybe not every single day, but we continued to do it all that spring. And then we did it all that summer, and we did it all that fall. And by that time, we had heard that there were people who did what was called swimming through. And that means you swim through the entire year, all winter long, you swim. And I know that at first I thought that was an insane idea to swim through. But after having done it for 6 months, and you know, the water is cold, even in the summer, that river is cold. So, you know, we've been in cold water for 6 months. And it actually felt like, that's kind of interesting. What would that be like? Why don't we just keep going? If it gets too much, we'll stop, but we'll just start. And so we did. And we swam through. We just kept going. And, you know, we got in the middle of snowstorms. We got in when it was frigid. There were times we didn't get in, but many, many days we just were like, ooh, what would it be like to be in the river in this weather? And so we just did it. So we went through that first winter, then we went through the, you know, spring, summer, fall. And as we're going into the next winter, we thought, maybe there's some other people around who would like this crazy thing. So we just put it out on our little exchange, you know, Google group in Tamworth, and people showed up for a dip in, I think it was September. I think the first full moon dip was in September. And we got a bunch of folks to dip that first time, and many of them just kept coming back. So we have a small group. There are probably about 15 of us in all, anywhere from 4 to 8 show up. We dip twice a week, typically. Sometimes dipping at other times on our own or spontaneously as we do. And we absolutely love it. It's just added so much to our life. And I'll just say we're always happy to include new members, totally. But what I want to share tonight is not really the outside story of dipping, the exterior of dipping, but really the interior of dipping. What happens inside me when I actually am walking into that cold water and deciding to lower myself down into that cold water and then just sit there. Like, what is actually happening inside? To me, that is the biggest part of it. It's that like internal relationship with what's going on inside. That's the biggest part of the experience for me. And my impetus for sharing this is that though this sounds like a pretty hard thing to do, I think that human life is filled with pretty hard things. So many hard things. Just being in a body that we cannot control is a hard thing. And living a human life with all these experiences that we cannot control, and then walking around with the weight of those experiences is a hard thing. Dealing with other people who are not us is a hard thing. Being in families, being in communities, being in a country, living on this planet and trying to figure out how do we live together on this planet and take care of this planet. That's a hard thing. So, though cold water dipping is a hard thing, it's just one hard thing among many hard things. And it's an optional one. And perhaps you've tried in your life to figure out ways to be with the hard stuff that comes up in life. And I feel like I've personally been on a lifelong search to understand how to be with the hard stuff that comes up in life. And rather surprisingly, um, some of the most effective methods that I have found came up when I wasn't looking for them, when I was just doing this weird thing. So the practices I'm going to share with you tonight are those things that I kind of stumbled upon without really trying. I just did this thing, this weird thing, and I began to realize, oh, I'm developing some skills that make doing this thing easier. And then I realized, oh, I'm using those skills in other places in my life, in other situations. So that's what I want to share. I'm going to tell you about 3 practices that developed out of my cold water dipping experience. And my hope is not just to tell you an interesting story about myself, but maybe give you something that you can use. I hope maybe you can leave tonight taking one or more of these practices with you and feeling like maybe you can apply it to something that's going on in your life. And I want to acknowledge that even though these practices grew out of my cold water dipping, they're not unique to that practice at all, or that not unique to that experience at all. These have probably been things that humans have stumbled upon throughout history, I think. You don't have to get into cold water to do the practices I'm going to tell you about. That just happens to be how I stumbled upon them. Okay, so as I said, I want to make this talk practical for you. So before I walk you through these 3 practices, I want to encourage you to think of a hard situation that's currently in your life. Your own cold water dipping experience, and not an optional one, one of those things that just is a non-negotiable hard thing that's happening in your life right now, causing some discomfort. And I'm guessing that you'll have one that will pop right up. Maybe it's a struggle with some sticky situation. Maybe it's a struggle with a person. Maybe it is a struggle with yourself, with some frustration you have with yourself. So I'll just give you a moment to narrow it down, because maybe there's like a few. Narrow it down, locate one. And by the way, you're not going to have to share this at all. Okay. So after I walk through each practice, I'm going to take a quick moment for you to apply that practice to this situation that you've just come up with in real time, and I'll walk you through doing it inside. Again, you're not going to have to share anything. So tonight you'll be able to start right away taking these practices and practicing them on something that's going on in your life. Okay, so you've got your discomfort in mind. So let's begin with the first practice. I want to take you first to my experience in the river. As I wade into the water, there's no question about it. It is cold. my body registers this and sends these warning messages to me. And they're completely appropriate to the situation. There's tension in my body as I'm walking in. I'm trying to get it to relax, but there's, just tension comes. There's shallow breathing, like my breath just automatically gets more shallow. I don't, I'm not taking my heart rate, but I'm sure that it's increasing as I'm getting into the water. And even after 4.5 years, my mind isn't saying, I love this. My mind is really screaming at me to stop. Like it's not as loud as it used to be, but it's still there going, are you sure you really want to do this? We don't really want to do this. It's still, that voice is still there. And at that point, I have some possible choices. One would be to react to that, "Ah, it's too cold" message that's coming through, and just turn around and head back to shore. And that would be completely understandable. Or I could tell myself, you're being weak. You've really got to do this. You told yourself you would do this. Now get in there and muscle through and do this thing you told yourself you would do. And actually, that just causes me to feel even colder because that creates a lot of tension in my body. So that one doesn't really work very well. And my physical, that physical system that's registering the cold and saying, it's really cold. This feels like too much. That's not weakness at all. That's just my body trying to protect me and my mind working with my body to try to protect me. It is correct. It's not a good idea for me to just hang out in the cold water forever. It's probably warning me against that danger. But what my mind's initial, like, this is too much reaction doesn't really understand is that I actually do love the cold water, and I love the way I feel when I'm in it, even though it's uncomfortable. I love it, even though I'm in the midst of this thing that's uncomfortable. And I love the way I feel afterwards. And I love the mental and the physical benefits that it's brought me. So, how do I work with this voice that comes up when I'm walking into the water? This voice that really wants to stop me from walking into the water. Is there a choice other than retreating or just forcing myself in? Well, this is where the first practice comes in. Here it is. I get really kind to that voice. I let it know I hear it, and I make space for it to be there. And that may seem confusing because why would I make space for a voice that wants me to stop doing the thing that I want to do? Well, I'm sure that's kind of familiar to you, right? That voice is feeling the need to keep me safe and trying to shut down a voice that's trying to keep me safe, that has like this task to keep me safe, and giving it no space when it actually fears that I'm going to do something not safe is not going to work. In fact, it will make it get even louder inside. And I'm sure you probably can relate to that when you've got a voice inside that's saying, no, don't do that thing. And you're like, no, shush, stop that. It just gets louder when we don't listen. But here's what does work. I speak to that fearful part of me inside and I say, hey, I know you're concerned that I'm going to die. And you want to keep me safe. Thank you. You are right. It is cold in here. And you're allowed to feel that. And you are allowed to let me know about that. And then I continue speaking to it. And this is important, I tell it, I am choosing to do this thing because I love it. And I know that I'm actually safer than you believe I am right now. And once I simply witness that fear and acknowledge that voice that's trying to get my attention, letting it know that I hear it, I appreciate it because it's not completely wrong. And I give it some more info, like, I'm not going to let us die. We're going to do this in a careful way because we like it. When I do that, this interesting thing happens to that voice inside. It actually gets quieter, which was so surprising to me to realize that when I'm kind to it, it gets a little quieter. It gets the message. Well, this is the way I think about it, at least. It gets the message that it's being heard. It doesn't need to shout so loud to get my attention. In terms of what's happening in my brain, as I've acknowledged and calmed that voice, I've enabled my brain's activity to move from that I got to keep you from dying mode that it is in, known as the amygdala, that part of the brain that is, going to protect you by getting you ready to fight or run away or pretend you're dead. And I've actually shifted the energy from that part of my brain into my brain's newer circuitry that can actually respond to reason. But that shift can't happen until and unless the fear feels acknowledged and seen and cared for. When the fear, it feels connected to me, not just it's on its own trying to warn me of everything, when it's like, oh, hey, there's someone else here, that brain shift is taking place, my body just automatically relaxes. My breathing calms down, and I'm sure my heart rate slows down, and other parts of my brain can start to come online. So let's take a moment to just try on this practice. So bring to mind the discomfort, that hard thing that you are facing. And now I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, if that's comfortable for you, so that you can kind of tune inside. I want you to imagine the voice inside of you that tries to protect you, to warn you about that uncomfortable situation that you identified. It might be one of many voices inside that come up around that situation, but see if you can focus on just that one voice inside who's trying to protect you with its own version of, it's going to be too much. This is going to be bad. We're going to be overwhelmed by this. See if you can sense into how it's trying to let you know of its concern. Is it words, maybe a repetitive thought that comes up? Maybe it's a sensation somewhere in your body or an emotional response that arrives. Or maybe it's a metaphorical image that comes up. Like I have voices inside that I swear feel like a black hole or like a wall or a fiery ball. Just notice how that protective voice in you shows up when it comes to warn you. Now, if you've got some sense of that voice, see if you can simply let that voice or that sensation or emotion know, hey, I hear you. I know you're concerned. It does make sense that you might feel this way. This does feel tricky and uncomfortable. Send that message to that voice inside. Now just see if it notices that you are paying attention to it. It's been making all these attempts to get your attention. Does it notice now that you're turning toward it and acknowledging it? And if it feels authentic, you might even just extend a little thank you to this voice, basically saying, I get it. You're trying to take care of me. Now, is this protective voice aware that it has a witness, that it's not alone? Is it aware that it's being seen? And if it is, does your witnessing of it have any impact on it? Often I can feel that voice softening a little bit, a slight letting go or letting down of the guard that it's holding. Just notice. Okay, feel free to open your eyes again. So, that practice of simply acknowledging the concern that's speaking inside of us calms our central nervous system. And that's a game changer. When we're in the oldest part of our brain, the amygdala, the fight or flight place, our energy is getting diverted from our thinking to our body to get ready for that hard job of surviving. When our brain thinks that we're under threat, it gets us ready to protect ourselves. And it takes a lot of energy to protect ourselves. So, thinking brains take a lot of energy. So, our thinking ability is the first thing to go when our amygdala concludes that we need to run or fight or play dead. But when we show up and we witness that voice inside us that's trying to take care of us, saying, ah, we're in danger, and we bring it some kind appreciation, saying, hey, I see you. Look at you working so hard. You're doing a good job. It's like that protective part kind of turns around and goes, what? Are you here? Someone else is here. It's not just me alone. And that is way less threatening for it. It relaxes in response to that. And that takes us into a whole other mind, really. And one that can think and entertain other possibilities. Okay. So now we know how to go from being right in the middle of that fearful part of the brain and shift into the part of our brain that can think. And we did this simply by doing some kind, compassionate witnessing. So we're ready to go to the next practice. So back to the river we go. So I'm sitting in the water. And once I could reliably bring myself into a place where I wasn't constantly dealing with the threat that this threatful feeling that I'm going to die, I realized that I wanted to have something a bit more empowering in my thought while I was sitting there with this challenge. So that brings us to this second practice. When I'm in the water, breathing calmly, but often wanting to get out nonetheless, I begin to remind myself, not only am I not going to die, but I am strong and I can do hard things. I've done difficult, uncomfortable things in the past. I reflect on how I've given birth. I've raised toddlers and teenagers. I've built and I've maintained relationships, and these are all hard things that I've done. I connect with the fact that I am able to take on hard challenges. I associate myself with a deep resource that I called upon in the past, and I can also call upon right now. And this is a really important part of step 2. I don't just think about it. I allow myself to feel what it's like to access that sense of power. The feeling aspect is really important here because I need to not just hear about my strength from some voice in my head. I need to feel my strength as a sense of this is who I am. I need to place myself in the midst of that strength to really experience it. Our sense of ourselves is built not on what we try to think about ourselves, but it's really built out of what we experience ourselves doing. So I take the strength that I experienced in a different time and I bring it right here to this time, into my body right now, kind of like a cut and paste or a copy and paste. Like I find that strength in another time and I remember it and I feel it and bring it in and kind of paste it right in my body, like in this scenario. Because we learn most thoroughly when we use our whole body, not just when we think about things, when our whole body experiences something. So, as I embody the feeling of being the person who has the strength to do this thing, that strength is available to me. I honestly feel stronger and I honestly can stay in that water longer when I do that. So, let's try this practice on. So, you've already practiced bringing kindness to the one inside who's trying to keep you safe in your uncomfortable situation. And hopefully, you've experienced the calming effects of that. Now, let's identify what could help you move through that difficult situation that you've chosen in a way that you would choose for yourself. Again, so close your eyes and bring that difficult situation to mind. Now, how would you like to be in that situation? How would you like to respond to it? Who would you like to be as you encounter that discomfort? Imagine whatever strength or courage or peace or resourcefulness that would feel good to you to have in that situation. Now, when you have a sense of how you want to be, see where you've felt that before. Can you mine that feeling from your own history? And even if you haven't felt it personally, imagine someone else who seems to have that ability, a person you admire for this quality or this way of being. Imagine that quality that you or another has felt. And right now, try it on. Really feel that quality. What does it feel like to embody that quality? How do you hold yourself? How do you breathe? How does your chest feel? How's your heart feel? What are your shoulders doing? How do you hold your head? Feel it in your body right now. Now envision yourself bringing that same energy into the difficult situation. Feel yourself meeting that situation with this type of energy, with this sense of who you are. As you're imagining this, just paste that energy right into yourself, right into you in this difficult situation, and feel what it's like to show up that way with this embodied energy. Okay, you can open your eyes. All right, now we're ready to move to the third and final practice. So first, let's review. We've been kind to our sweet survival brain, who's just doing what it does best to warn us. And that has calmed the inside of our system, allowing our brain to shift from the survival mode into the mode where it can actually think some new thoughts. And then we've chosen and embodied the feeling that enables us to move forward toward what we want and how we want to be. So now that we're calm and we're choosing the way we want to show up, the third practice is to look again to see if this inner shifting that's taking place inside our body and inside our mind might be shifting our perception of what is outside of us. So we'll go back to my experience at the river. As I sat in the water with calmness and strength back online, I said to myself, yeah, it's cold. And what else? And as I had that in my mind, and what else? And began to look around, I noticed so much that I hadn't seen before. After doing this inner work with my mind and my body, the outer world of this icy river just started to look different than when I first experienced it. As I looked again, I could see all these types of beautiful ice formations. I could hear the sound of the water like gurgling under the ice in certain places and like tinkling under the ice in other places. I could notice the sun that was shining on the river, then being reflected up onto tree trunks and like playing a little movie on the tree trunks. So, what was outside of me began to come into like more brilliant focus all around me. And also, I began to notice that this shift in perception wasn't just happening as I looked outside of me, also inwardly, I began to notice that what at first felt like just this kind of uniform experience of cold that I was having inside was actually a lot of different sensations and of varying qualities, varying intensities, varying durations. There was all this different stuff going on inside me that I hadn't even noticed before. There are all these subtleties to be noticed in my experience with the cold that I just hadn't noticed. And it made the cold experience, it took it from being this monolith that was this one big hard thing and turned it into this many faceted thing that was way more interesting. And I could be in relationship with this many faceted thing that was going on inside me. I could keep learning about it. It just totally shifted my engagement with it. It was like before I had like painted it with this big wide brush. Like I had one color and I painted the whole thing with this big wide brush. And then I realized, oh, no, no, no. I need like this tiny little, very fine brush and all these different colors because there's so much detail here. There's so many things to be noticed here. Asking, and what else, invited me to open up and see what lay beyond the assumptions and the conclusions that my survival brain was coming up with really fast, and invited me to move into curiosity and attention and heightened appreciation for this richness that was here all along, but I just was missing. So let's spend a moment with this practice as well. So go back to that situation that had brought you a feeling of challenge. But as you visit it now, you're able to access a calmer mind and body, and you're able to show up in the way that you've chosen. So, from this new state, take a look around with your eyes closed. Take a look around that situation and recognize that, sure, there are hard elements here. There's no need to deny that. But then ask, and what else? What else is here beyond those hard elements? You don't even need to think too hard about this. Just see what floats up in your awareness. Are there things that have been there that you've been missing? Are there parts of this experience that are ready to be seen anew now that you've done a bit of shifting? Are there little details ready to be noticed? As you bring curiosity and new appreciation, are there elements of richness that have actually been here all along? Okay, feel free to open your eyes. So, those are three practices that you can use to experience comfort right in the midst of discomfort. The discomfort doesn't necessarily go away, but you can create comfort right in the midst of it. You can create your own experience right in the midst of it. So, as a refresher, the first practice is be a witness. Extend kindness to the one inside who's feeling afraid about your safety. And once you've calmed your body and your mind by witnessing it, the second one is choose how you want to feel. Embody that energy that's going to move you toward what you want. And then when you're feeling identified with that way of being, the third practice is open up your perception and ask, and what else? See what richness has been waiting for you to open up to it. And I hope that you'll experiment with one or more of these practices. And I wrote them down for you. So you can get them. Um, and now I'd love to hear about your experiences, either with that now or other times you've used any of those practices, and anything else you'd like to share or anything else you'd like to ask. And while you're just sort of sitting with that, I'll give you a moment to sit with that. I'll tell you a few other things. I'm going to be offering a few more free workshops in January. And in the new year, I'm going to offer a several session course. And the focus of that course is going to be how, in this info saturated world that we live in, can we go about reclaiming our attention? That's what I feel like I want to dig into. How do we do that? So that's what the course is going to be about. So you can stay tuned for that. I also do one-on-one coaching, and I've got little cards back there, a little piece of paper with the three practices on them. It's got my website on it too. And there's also a sheet of paper there. If you want to write down your email address, I'll put you on my email list so I can tell you what's coming up. Um, so there are a few things there. Also, if you're excited about cold water dipping, our Tamworth group, we call ourselves the Otters, we meet for coffee once a month at the other bakery, and it happens to be this Thursday at 9 o'clock. So if anybody wants to join us and just sit around and talk about it, we'd love to have you join us. And we meet at 8:30 on Thursday morning, right before, and dip in the river. So if you're really brave and you want to dip in the river with us, you could come Thursday morning and do that.